It began with no warning, only a violent shudder from the ocean floor beneath the Sea of Okhotsk. And within seconds, the earth cracked open. At precisely 7:24 p.m. Eastern Time, an earthquake registering a staggering magnitude of 8.8 struck off the eastern coast of Russia. Its epicenter was approximately 13 miles beneath the ocean surface, shallow enough to unleash a deadly chain reaction across the Pacific Rim. Tsunami alerts were triggered in over 20 countries, from Japan to the entire west coast of the United States, from the islands of Hawaii to the shores of Chile and Indonesia. The tremor was the most powerful in the region since the catastrophic events of 2011, when the Great East Japan earthquake sent tidal waves crashing into Fukushima and sparked a nuclear disaster that altered global energy policy for an entire decade. But this time, it is not only tectonic plates that are shifting. The geopolitical aftershocks of this seismic rupture may extend far beyond the waterline. Footage arriving overnight from Russia's Far East paints a portrait of geological fury. Cliffs along the Kamchatka Peninsula shearing off and plunging into the cold Pacific, ground shaking inside hospitals mid-surgery. And in Japan, citizens forced to flee to rooftops, clinging to the same protocols honed through decades of disaster drills. In the United States, police patrolled coastal towns from Santa Monica to Crescent City, cautioning late-night walkers and early-morning joggers to step away from the waterline. And in Hawaii, gridlock traffic snaked through the mountains, thousands of people scrambling to higher ground as sirens wailed through the night. Some waves struck the shoreline at heights exceeding 6 feet, slamming into buildings, flooding roads, and momentarily paralyzing island life. At first glance, these may appear to be the scenes of a familiar natural disaster, tragic but cyclical. However, history demands a deeper reading, and the context in which this earthquake occurred is far from neutral. The Sea of Okhotsk lies adjacent to one of the most militarized corners of the earth. Russia's eastern military district maintains significant strategic installations along this very coastline, including nuclear-capable missile bases, Pacific Fleet naval command centers, and advanced radar systems designed to monitor both American and Chinese activity across the Pacific Basin. To understand what this means geopolitically, one must consider not only the scale of the natural event, but the precise location, the military posture of regional powers, and the timing amid a rapidly deteriorating global security environment. The earthquake's epicenter was positioned less than 400 miles from Petropavlovsk Kamchatsky home to Russia's primary Pacific submarine base. This facility houses a portion of Moscow's ballistic missile submarine fleet, the very vessels designed to survive a first strike and retaliate. If those facilities were even temporarily disrupted, it would compromise a critical leg of Russia's nuclear triad. And yet, in the midst of global conflict, from the war in Ukraine to tensions in Taiwan to shifting military alliances in the Pacific, the Kremlin has remained conspicuously silent. Was there damage to strategic installations? Did Moscow quietly reposition its nuclear forces? Or was this event used intentionally or not as a diversion, a signal, or a test? While seismologists rightfully emphasize that tectonic activity cannot be predicted, intelligence analysts in Washington, Tokyo, and Beijing are less concerned with causality and more focused on consequence. Consider this. Within hours of the quake, the United States military repositioned several naval assets in the Pacific Command Theater. At least 2 guided missile destroyers were observed changing course off the coast of Guam, and surveillance aircraft based in Okinawa conducted wide-area patrols along the outer reaches of the Russian exclusive economic zone. These are not random shifts. They are signals. In geopolitics, natural disasters are often accelerants, not disruptions. They expose vulnerabilities in supply chains, communication systems, and regional command structures. They test the resilience of states and the credibility of their leaders. In the case of Russia, the timing could not be more precarious. Moscow is already overextended in Ukraine, its economy strained under layers of Western sanctions, its Far East region increasingly isolated and underdeveloped compared to its Chinese neighbor to the south. And now, an 8.8 magnitude quake has rattled the very foundation of its Pacific bastion. For Japan, the danger was both literal and symbolic. Tsunami advisories extended from Hokkaido down to Okinawa. Thousands of residents evacuated to designated shelters, many reliving the traumas of 2011. But beyond the civil response, the Japanese self-defense forces were placed on high alert. Naval units in Sasebo and Yokosuka scrambled into defensive positions. Ballistic missile tracking systems were recalibrated to monitor potential secondary threats. And emergency communication protocols between Tokyo and Washington were activated. The United States, for its part, adopted a dual-track approach. Publicly, it offered humanitarian support, crisis mapping, and regional coordination. Privately, it reassessed readiness postures across the Indo-Pacific Command, calibrating its strategic footprint in the face of an unpredictable scenario. In the case of Russia, the timing could not be more precarious. Moscow is already overextended in Ukraine, its economy strained under layers of Western sanctions, its Far East region increasingly isolated and underdeveloped compared to its Chinese neighbor to the south. And now, an 8.8 magnitude quake has rattled the very foundation of its Pacific bastion. For Japan, the danger was both literal and symbolic. Tsunami advisories extended from Hokkaido down to Okinawa. Thousands of residents evacuated to designated shelters, many reliving the traumas of 2011. But beyond the civil response, the Japanese self-defense forces were placed on high alert. Naval units in Sasebo and Yokosuka scrambled into defensive positions. Ballistic missile tracking systems were recalibrated to monitor potential secondary threats, and emergency communication protocols between Tokyo and Washington were activated. The United States, for its part, adopted a dual-track approach. Publicly, it offered humanitarian support, crisis mapping, and regional coordination. Privately, it reassessed readiness postures across the Indo-Pacific Command, calibrating its strategic footprint in the face of an unpredictable scenario. It is a pattern observed before, most notably after the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, when U.S. military assets deployed to aid-stricken Indonesian provinces, while simultaneously mapping undersea terrain and evaluating choke points near the Strait of Malacca. The question now is not whether the tsunami has passed, but whether a new wave of strategic realignment has begun. China, though geographically distant from the quake's epicenter, is acutely attuned to its implications. Beijing's ambitions in the Pacific are rooted in expansion of influence and the weakening of existing U.S. alliances if the Russian Far East were to experience prolonged instability, or if Moscow were forced to divert military assets inland for reconstruction. A vacuum could emerge, one that China might quietly seek to fill. Already, there are Chinese infrastructure investments stretching into eastern Siberia, including energy pipelines, joint port ventures, and rail extensions linking the Russian Pacific with inland China. While officially framed as development aid or win-win cooperation, the geopolitical reality is more transactional. China extends influence where Russia recedes. In the days following the earthquake, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokespeople expressed solidarity but stopped short of offering material assistance. Instead, state media focused on tsunami impacts in Hawaii and the U.S. mainland, subtly reframing the narrative toward American vulnerability. It is a classic play in information warfare. Shift the lens, reshape perception, and quietly consolidate power where attention is diverted. Hawaii, meanwhile, bore a tangible brunt of the tsunami. Wave surges up to 5.7 feet were recorded on the island of Maui, inundating beachfront infrastructure and prompting thousands to evacuate. Honolulu International Airport delayed or diverted multiple flights, and residents across the islands faced rolling power disruptions and road closures. Yet the significance of Hawaii lies not merely in its civilian population, but in its role as the strategic heartbeat of the United States Indo-Pacific Command. Pearl Harbor remains a linchpin for U.S. naval projection across the Pacific. Submarine squadrons, missile defense installations, and logistical command centers are all concentrated in this archipelago. Any disruption, even temporary, introduces a risk vector, and adversaries, from Beijing to Pyongyang, are watching closely. The National Weather Service has reported tidal anomalies from Crescent City, California, to Port San Luis, to Santa Monica. While none reached catastrophic levels, the sheer reach of these disturbances is telling. A wave that originates off the coast of Russia travels across 3,000 miles of open ocean and still displaces water across an entire continental shelf is not merely a scientific event. It is a reminder of connectivity, of shared vulnerability, and of the speed at which chaos can spread. There is also the Arctic dimension to consider. Russia's Far East is a key gateway to the Northern Sea Route, the emerging maritime passageway linking East Asia to Europe through melting polar ice. If seismic instability jeopardizes coastal ports or undersea cable routes, it could delay Moscow's already ambitious Arctic strategy and force recalibration of Chinese cargo routes and Western energy supply lines. Furthermore, any long-term damage to Pacific seabed topography may impact submarine cable networks, which carry the vast majority of global internet traffic. The vulnerability of these cables is rarely discussed in public forums, but military planners are acutely aware of their significance. In recent years, NATO and allied intelligence agencies have repeatedly warned of Russian submersible activity near key data cables, raising concerns over sabotage or disruption in the event of conflict. Now, nature may have done what espionage could only contemplate, shifted the ocean floor, and with it, the axis of information flow. As aftershocks ripple through the Pacific and warnings continue across coastlines, the question is no longer simply whether the tsunami is over. It is whether the geopolitical balance it shook, it can return to equilibrium. Natural disasters are not just humanitarian events. They are geopolitical inflection points. And in 2025, with a world already stretched thin by war, economic fragmentation, and technological decoupling, even the Earth itself has become a player in the great game. The 8.8 magnitude earthquake off the Russian coast may be recorded in scientific annals for its size and scope, but in geopolitical terms, its true magnitude is yet to be measured, because the waves it unleashed may not be the last.